KDF itaweza wajangili? That is a problem question on Taifa Leo today. Umedharau vitisho vya Ruto, wakalemewa ama wakawalemea polisi na kuua baadhi yao. Sasa wasubiri kuonana na wanajeshi. That is what is headlining the front page of Taifa Leo today. Changamoto, upana na mkao wa eneo la bonde la Ufa unazidisha ugumu wa kuwashinda majangili. Kundi moja la wakazi hasa mpakani haliwezi kukabili kupokonywa silaha, huku kundi hasimu likibaki nazo. Gavana anatembea adai wanasiasa hushirikiana na majangili kuiba mifugo na kuuza nyama yake kwingineko kwa faida. Mila na desturi za wakazi wa maeneo yaliyoathiri zinashabikia ujangili unaohusishwa na wizi wa mifugo. The story continues on page 2. KDF itaweza majangili? That's the probing question. And this is what also Victor has drawn inside the Daily Nation today. Change tack, Ministry of Interior. And you can see the CS there, changing tack. A big hammer there. There's a broken one too from the National Police Service. Will they hack it? And the probing question that we want to delve deeper into right now is of the constitution approval, because according to Article 241, subsection 3 of the Constitution C, it says that the Kenya Defense Forces may be deployed to restore peace in any part of the country affected by unrest or instability only with the approval of the National Assembly. Only with the approval of the National Assembly. Did the President jump gun in regard to the constitutional requirement, 241 subsection 3C of the Kenyan Constitution? Ahmed Hashi.
Duale, I think that the National Assembly is the sovereign institution in this country. And Duale, you know that many of us on this table were involved in the constitution of this country. I'm speaking about the gentleman on my left and on my right, and myself. And I think, Duale, that one of the things that I have always been very strongly for is for the National Assembly to have, to play its role under the Constitution that we all fought for. And Duale, and that is an oversight, and that is through the committees to study what is going on, to make sure that the role of Parliament is not by fiat taken on a ride. And I think, Duale, that if you deploy troops in this country, whether outside this country or inside this country, you need a prior approval of the National Assembly. And we need a debate about it. Otherwise, Duale is like a Gulf of Tonkin thing. And that would be a unilateral way without oversight of the National Assembly. And these are both houses, the lower and the Senate. And Duale, I think that it obfuscates in a large way that this country still has the presidential system is very, very powerful. Everybody used to talk about an imperial presidency. Duale, this stems from our past, where the governor could just sign anything. And now the National Assembly, Duale, as you know, wants to be in the good books of the president, because that's the politics of this country. Because the president of this country, Duale, has the cabinet. What does the cabinet do, Duale? It does development. It sends goodies to the counties. And any member of parliament who opposes the president's policies or intentions may not get the goodies that the government needs to send. So the MPs are in paralysis. And the cabinet and the president is the executive is very powerful, and a lot of the powers we give them in the Constitution. But the National Assembly has to be a place where men and women stand up for these important issues. And I think, Duale, that I have yet to hear from the Defense Secretary. I have not seen him in the media for the last 24 hours over this issue. There has to be a robust debate, because I don't believe, Duale, that Northern Kenya needs this massive sense of the military. I think that, Duale, we need to discipline and to fight and to oppose these kinds of issues in northern Kenya. The government has a responsibility to protect its citizens and bring security. There's no question about it. How it does that, Duale, is the purview of the National Assembly. It has to debate it. The Cabinet Secretaries have to come and testify in front of the Defense Committee. And in that way, in short order, we can get the deployment of the forces that we need to stop what is happening in northern Kenya. And then the people of this country cannot be informed if there is no if the National Assembly is not debating. And it says that in that constitution that we all ratified. If the National Assembly is not debating this issue, how are we going to be informed? I mean, not a lot of people who are working from 6 to 10 at night about give a days about policy in the National Assembly. But it is our responsibility. It is the responsibility of the National Assembly and politicians to tell our country what the hell is going on. And Duale, I think that we should not shortchange the National Assembly, even if the National Assembly itself is not trying to do its job.
Right, so it was just yesterday that we had the resumption of Parliament. The deployment was the day before. Was it that critical to actually deploy the KDF before the approval of National Assembly, Ruto? We should have waited for, and then that will have been, even if it's calling for a special sitting to actually discuss this matter before, because Parliament was in recess.
So it's not clear what the sequencing is. In principle, yes, that the approval needs to be sought from the Parliamentary Committee, but we have in the papers today a statement by the Honourable Koech simply saying that the Defence Committee is seized of the matter, that they are discussing it. So one would assume that from that there has been an application to the parliamentary body, the correct parliamentary body.
But that's a committee. We're talking about collectively as a National Assembly.
So presumably at some point the committee then refers it to the floor of Parliament. But I think Parliament has just resumed. I mean, that's the other issue that's there. It's also not clear whether the deployment has actually happened, in the sense that there may be pre-mobilization, but the amnesty that was given by the Cabinet Secretary expires, I believe, either tonight, late tonight, or early tomorrow morning. So I'm not at this point clear that a deployment has happened, but there's an announcement of a deployment and a gazette notice.
All right, let's hear from...
Let's first of all look at the context in which we are debating this issue. It's the very nature of our constitution that is based on, Baron Montesquieu's notion of separation of powers, which is the demon we have been trying to deal with, because the notion of separation of powers assumes a government that is working in silos. So working silos in the sense that the executive is there, gets permission, this now processes the permission, and so on. I think if you read, the executive order number 1 of 2023, what the government is trying to do is essentially to rein in that idea of silos. And therefore, when we talk about internal consultations, remember, a specific person, I think it was the Attorney General, Justin Muturi, was appointed by the government to deal with the Parliament.
Yeah.
So if you are talking about the head of Parliament within the government, that's it.
That's Muturi.
Muturi. And the issues to deal with some of these issues by his knowledge of how Parliament operates, how you can obtain authority or power or endorsement prior to the formalization of the process. I think it's not the first time that this is happening. In fact, when we were talking about the KDF deployment in Somalia in 2010, it was also the issue that you have deployed. In fact, you started training before. This was said that you even took the training of certain forces before deployment. So the action was already taken before. This was the argument at that time. Let me say this: it's hair splitting to talk about when authority was given and when it was not given. If Kenyans are dying, if we have 100 Kenyans dying, it is basically hair splitting to begin talking about whether KDF was deployed rightly or wrongly. All these are our resources. They are our security resources collectively. The demarcation is for the purpose of operation. I think what should worry us, and I am deeply worried about this, is our shrinking boundaries. because the mandate of a military, KDF included, is to protect the border. The moment the border now moves all the way up to Laikipia, and moves all the way up to Baringo, moves all the way up to Samburu, it tells you that we are almost losing that area, because the war is about winning and losing. Now, what is the chance that you basically is engaged in a 10-year war of that region, or you actually lose to the bandits? It's you lose the country. This is what we're talking about.
An eighth of the country, actually.
Which is the eighth of the country. So that is, to me, is the most worrying part. And that is why I don't think deploying KDF in that region is wrong, because our border is shrinking because of the growing
But no one is saying it's wrong. No one is saying deploying
procedure. We are discussing procedure here.
And I'm surprised you're saying this is purely hair splitting when you talk
about
it.
It is hair splitting because the country. Why are we declaring a state of emergency? We're still declaring a state of emergency so that we can use all the resources that are available to us at this juncture.
So does it mean when we declare a state of emergency, you have all the resources, so the constitution is not supreme in that particular matter?
Supremacy of the constitution that don't mean the idiocy of watching people as they die. Because you have the right to take a photograph, so you video a person who is being strangled and dying.
But you cannot say it's the idiocy of actually watching people dying, and because I think even the safeguards of this constitution, the drafters was put here to safeguard every Kenyan. Because if we go with the manner you're talking about, a state of emergency, you need to deploy, everyone will be, all the commander-in-chief or whoever will be actually calling upon KDF to be deployed because of their own also interests at the end of the day. This is primarily just to safeguard Kenyans.
Deployment is not like this. It's not a thing of the finger. It is a whole process, and I think that's the point Irungo was making. That you make the indication, this is what we want to do, and you gazette it. Then you go into the process of legitimation of that process, getting the relevant permissions, getting the relevant.
So you work backwards?
You're not working backwards. You don't get the permissions. You don't get permissions. I mean, remember, I started off with the concept of Montesquieu's, Baron Montesquieu's separation of powers and how to operationalize it. In the olden Moi days, you didn't have to have this kind of debate. Yeah. If you're talking about the Laikipia days, you didn't have this kind of debate. That's why it was so easy to deploy in Somalia in 2010, because the constitution had just come in, it was not operationalized. So now the situation has changed, and it has changed. There has to be a lot of internal consultation, and I think that's what Koech, the chairman of the committee, is saying, that we assist with the matter from our end. Remember, Parliament has not cried. Has not made you a cry, has not complained about it, that their authority has been undermined by the executive. There is no that claim. But I think what we need to underline, that it is always important for the government, because this is a public television, to get the nod of Parliament before deploying the military. Why? Right. Because the moment you do it, and this is what I was emphasizing on, you are saying that our border is shrinking. Because the primary role of the military is to protect the integrity of our borders, our sovereignty from external threat, not internal threat. By the time we deploy the military, we are saying that our border is not only the threat, but the adjacent areas.
All right, thank you. Let me hear from Matt as well, because Matt has also been a man with the boots on the ground. You can talk to us experientially. When given such kind of the nature of the situation might be diametrically different from what we have here, but where does legislation, or where does actually the voice of Parliament really come in and the approval, given the experience?
And I think the primary principle here is the rule of law.
Right.
And that is fundamentally the Constitution and the legislative process that governs the deployment of the military in what's typically called an operation in the aid of the civil power. That is when the civilian authority requests that the military be deployed in support. And I have to respectfully disagree. This is not about Kenya's borders shrinking. This is not about external actors coming and reducing Kenya's territorial integrity. It's an internal criminal threat, which would normally be a police action. But when the level of violence is so rapid, escalates so fast, that is when the civilian authorities can say, this exceeds the capacity of the police, it exceeds the capacity of our other security agencies, we require military support. At that point, the process, the sequencing, in any democracy can become messy and blurred, because the competing priorities of preserving human life, of restoring order and the rule of law, and the procedural workings of Parliament may be at odds with one another or may be operating in parallel. But I don't think this is hair-splitting. I think it's very important that this, I would characterize this as what would normally be called checks and balances.
I agree.
That is that in an ideal democracy, the Parliament would have the time to complete the process of legitimization, of authorization of a military action within the territory of the Republic of Kenya. But in a less than ideal situation, what is essential is that whether Parliament approves in advance whether the deployment has taken place or not, and it's not yet clear whether deployment has taken place, as my friend has argued. The point is that if the military acts in excess, or the executive acts ultra vires, beyond its powers, that Parliament is then able to exercise a check and balance and say, stop, we need to review this action, and we need to claw back some of the civilian, the constitutional authorities that the representative, the legislative branch of government owns. At this stage, I'm not sure, I don't think any of us are sure exactly where we stand in this operation, but the checks and balances must apply under the Constitution, the rule of law.
If I can just add a little bit to that, I agree with Matt on this.
Excuse me.
And I know where my good friend on the left is coming from on the issue, because of the really huge need for security. And always we're tempted to fast track the law, or to overlook it, or sometimes not pay attention to it, because the need for the security is so great that it seems like a liberal ice cream day to go to Parliament and get approval. But of course, Matt is entirely right that we need the approval. It needs to be, the legislation needs to be passed, and it needs to be passed with speed, with dispatch. My learned senior on the left says, quotes Montesquieu, and Montesquieu's whole idea of separation of powers is tranquility. And he specifically points to the legislative process as a way of dealing with the separation of powers. So I firmly believe that there is, on the one side, the weight in which our learned friend on the left tells us that there needs to be speed, there needs to be dispatch, and these things need to be solved. And on the other hand, the need for there to be the rule of law, the legal authority, and the ability to have if something really terrible happens there, these soldiers need to be covered by the rule of law. They are going there to suppress, and they're going to use violence. And civilians may get caught in the act. They need a background legislation that tells them what they're doing is legal. Otherwise, someone is going to go to the Kenya High Court and sue the hell out of our soldiers. We don't want that. So we want to tell the National Assembly to do its job and pass this thing so the president can bring security to northern Kenya.
So I think for me, what I've heard in terms of this discussion is probably 5 success elements. The first is that we stop treating banditry as some form of cultural expression, that it is organized crime and should be treated as such. The second is that the deployment needs to have parliamentary approval, and it needs also independent oversight. And I think this is the point about IPOA and the Kenya National Commission essentially having access to be able to take complaints where they may arise in the context of this.
But I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned that, does it also fall under the remit of KDF? It doesn't. With
you said this is the really important thing about the Gazette notice that went out, signed by the Inspector General, because what he declared is that this is a police operation supported by KDF. Yes. And therefore IPOA has completely a legal mandate to be able to oversee this operation. The other thing that was important, I think, in terms of the Gazette notice by the Interior Minister was that he listed a number of agencies that would be exempt from the curfew. And I think there were two groups that I particularly looked for, and I found them. One was journalists, and the second was advocates of the court of law. So I think, it is important also that you don't close down the area so it becomes a no-go zone, and rumors and speculations begin to emerge about what's happening. But actually, there is independent oversight of the process. The last one, of course, and this is the most important, is that we do see universal disarmament. That we do see people handing over weapons
across the board,
not just one community, not just the other community, but across the board. I think these are the 5 success elements if we are to succeed in this process.
Right. Let's wind up with the. You wanted to say something? We just wanted.
I'm sorry. Can I just add one success element,
Yeah.
which I think may have been overlooked, and that is prosecution.
Yeah.
Accountability before courts of law.
Prosecution.
I would also notice that this is not the first time KDF is being deployed to deal with dangerous elements within our country, and with far-reaching human rights consequences. If you recall the Elgon issue, which, according to Human Rights Watch and other human rights watchdogs, was a huge success in terms of military, but a dismal failure in terms of human rights observances. And so
the
on.
Wagala massacre, which is we're almost on the anniversary again.
Yes, and so on. So what we want to deal with, and what I think the concept that should be governing us is what we call the civil-military cooperation. And that's what the IG is invoking, civil military cooperation. And civil military cooperation is not just about war. It's also about disasters. It's about whenever there is an overwhelming, incidents that requires more capacity than any other security sector has. For example, the only sector with the capacity to do aerial rescues and wars and all is the military.
Right.
To the extent that even the servicing of the helicopters and so of the police force has been put to the military because of the many accidents that have taken over the last couple of years and so on. Now, so we are really dealing with the concept of civil military cooperation,
Right.
and therefore when we're talking about mandates and seeking clearance from Parliament and all, that's why it's an issue of debate. Otherwise, if it was an open deployment of the military, then what we will be talking about, that this is a KDF operation. But instead, this is basically like there is an earthquake and something like that, and the civilian side of things want support or asking for support, require support from the military to that extent. So I think it's a very wise way of adhering to the Constitution while at the same time using the capacity that the military has. So it's a wise way. And this, for me, would be the way to go even into the future, in talking about lessons learned, to go into the future. Because the moment we have a military-only deployment that is authorized, whether authorized by Parliament or not authorized by Parliament, we are walking a very, very dangerous patch. So and when the military came to Nairobi, for example, it was deployed in Nairobi in a civilian oversight. Obviously, it was a civilian president who created the NMS, and they did a good job. But people say that it was unnecessary civil military kind of a cooperation. That they would have still supported the military without having created NMS. This is some of it. So the real debate here is about what is the future of civil military cooperation in Kenya, where the military just give its own capacity in order either to cut costs or to use skills that are not available to the civilian component without militarizing the state. Because the threat, the real threat to civilian power is militarization of the civilian space. And that is what is at the check within the northern Kenya.
I just wanted to ask before I wind up, so when we have the anti-stock theft units,
Yes.
is it incapacitated that they cannot really, tackle this? Is it way beyond what they have been resourced to do? That we have to pick up the KDF? What does it really tell?
The point is, within the Constitution and within the question, so it's about, remember, we are dealing with one element here, and the element is the coercive power in philosophical terms. Who wields coercive power? It is the government. It is the only one authorized philosophically to wield power, to wield the coercive power. And within that wielding of coercive power, we get the segmentation. The police can hold to this extent, even in terms of the capacity of their guns and so on. Now, it is only after Westgate when we start talking about the police having mobile security, meaning something very close to the tanks, right? You have the tanks in the streets, which are not necessarily military tanks.
We saw them during the 2017 post-election violence.
Post-election violence. And the idea was that too many of our police officers are dying because they are not protected. So the need to protect the police force also required some adjustment into our law that would allow some mobile security within the police force.
I think we really need to get away from the theoretical and we need to come down to how this operates. We've talked about the law, we've talked about the Constitution. Civil-military cooperation is not an issue here. It's an issue in war zones, where the military have control of an area, and CIMIC, or civil military cooperation, is what the military best practice requires in order for them to restore civilian governance and administration in a situation of conflict. Here, we are talking about the supremacy of civilian authority in this country. And what that means when the rubber hits the road, when there's an operation, is that there needs to be a standing mechanism. Now, in some countries, it's called a command post. In others, it's a task force. It is a interagency mechanism in which the police, the military, the anti-stock theft unit, whichever services are required, the National Forensics Authority, maybe medical authorities required, it may be that the Red Cross is involved, but there needs to be an interagency mechanism that manages how emergencies are responded to. And unless war has been declared, then the leadership, the chair of that authority, is or must be a civilian authority, and the military come under civilian control in the aid of the civil power. And unless that kind of cooperative interagency mechanism exists, what you find, whether it's going in northern Kenya now, or at Westgate and other previous emergencies, is chaos, because each agency is responding to its own command with independent and sometimes competing and overlapping mandates. So just coming down from this legislative and constitutional level, when we come to operations, that civilian control of an interagency mechanism is essential if we're going to be able to deal with these sorts of crises.
Let me answer that, because it was responding to my point. It's important that we follow immediately. The single lesson that came from Westgate attack was the need for the interagency cooperation in almost every area. And today, if you go to, we are coming from Garissa, particularly in the evening, coming to Nairobi, there is an interagency operation deployment, which has even the what you call the KWS. It did not just even KWS is there because of the smuggling of wood and other banned products. Baobab and whatever, whatever. Now, if you, in all the strategic corners, if you're going to Loitoktok, right? Immediately you are getting to Loitoktok, you find that agency deployment. I think the point to make here is that the concept of interagency cooperation and operation is now active for the last 10 years in Kenya. Prior to that, it was not existing. I want also to insist that civil military cooperation is not one only when we are in war zones. It's not true. Because if you have a civilian oversight here, like we have a minister who is a civilian, we have a PS who is a civilian, you have a CAS who is civilian oversighting the military. But the direct authority is from CDF to the president, and there is not even a deputy in between. What are we talking about? The total civilian oversight.
All right,
therefore, the military can only be called to aid the military.
We need to bring it to a close. Hashi, you wanted to say something?
No. I think we've exhausted it.
One sentence. I mean, I think this idea of an interagency thinking is really important. What I'm missing is a conversation with the county governments, because if we start off by saying that, you know, one of the roots of this is criminality and lawlessness, so that's one driver. The second driver has to be poverty and marginalization and the collapse of livelihoods in this area. Now, that will not be dealt with by a rule of law pacification campaign. It has to, even before the campaign completes, it has to have a strategy for the millions of people in this area that are essentially not seeing the possibility of development. And I think for me, the other question is whether there is a process of interagency cooperation and thinking within those county governments in that area, because they have 14 functions as county governments. They don't have the security function, but they have 14 functions, and it's those functions that would lead to sustainable peace.
Okay. Thank you. Right, let's just cross over borders and see what is happening around us as well, beginning in Rwanda and Somalia, with Somaliland as well. But primarily on Rwanda security, and that is with DRC, we have thousands of panicking people who are fleeing from a strategic town in eastern Congo as a Rwandan-backed militia group pushes closer to sealing off the last road exit from Goma, the provincial capital and the biggest city in the region. Videos on social media showed an exodus of exhausted women and children from the town of Sake, a key crossroads west of Goma. All people staggered down under the weight of mattresses and sacks of belongings. Children carried infants on their backs, farmers pulled goats, and young men pushed bicycles and wooden scooters overloaded with bags. We have also the M23 militia, who was being reported to have advanced to within 10 kilometers of Sake, and heavy artillery was reportedly audible in the town. Now, if they capture Sake, they will be able to control Goma's supply routes and place the city under siege. They already control the road to north, while the east is blocked by the Rwandan border, and the south has only a lake route with limited boat traffic. A report by Human Rights Watch said M23 rebels had committed a series of war crimes and other atrocities in the region in recent months, including the summary execution of dozens of civilians. If we cross over now to Somalia and Somaliland now, we have the separatist region of Somaliland on Sunday accusing Somalia of attacking its soldiers despite a ceasefire imposed after a heavy fighting in a contested border town earlier in the week. Somaliland, which has claimed independence from Somalia since 1991, has never been recognized internationally, but it's often seen as a beacon of stability in the chaotic region. However, political unease has mounted in recent months. This week, the United Nations said at least 20 people had been killed in disputed town of Las Nod in clashes between Somaliland armed forces and militia loyal to the central government of Somalia. I think last week we really discussed largely on the Somalia and Somaliland, so I don't expect that we'll give it developments. Yes, but with this just developments on Rwanda and yes.
Matt and I know one or two things about it. I think it's my turn to speak.
Sure.
I think that we have to get some basic facts on the table. That the Somali Republic is part of East Africa, part of Africa, and part of the of the international community. That's one. And I think that there's no border dispute inside the Somali Republic. I think there's a dispute about whether you're going to have one country or two in Somalia. And I think the international community is congealed towards making sure that there is only one country in Somalia. However, nobody's going to run away from the issues of autonomy, from the issues of devolution, from the issues of local autonomy. I think what Las Anod has brought up is has brought a great disrepute to the very concept of Somaliland, and of course the heartland of the groups that are claiming that Somaliland. I come from that lineage segmentation, even though I'm not from there. But the facts of the matter is, when we are discussing the public policy issues, I think the issues of the hearth and the issues of primordiality have to be put aside, and your eyes cannot be glazed over these issues. You have to look at the public policy and really call it out as it is. So that's one. The second thing, I think it's appalling what has happened to Las Anod. I think that President Bihi has used overwhelming and unnecessary force. Remember, there's a chronological event to this, Debal. There were shootings and assassinations in Las Anod. The community from northwest, the Digil and Mirifle community that was there, was told to leave by the administration in there because they thought that Al-Shabaab was in that community. The assassinations, Debal, continued. So that means that there was a hand inside there that was committing these assassinations from without. So the intelligence system in Somaliland may have failed because, by the way, they have an excellent intelligence system. Excellent. I'm just shocked that in Las Anod they could not figure out what was going on. And now the third thing is that they used the hammer. I remember, Debal, we had some students killed in Garissa. The Kenya government did not send the KDF to go and smash down Garissa and with artillery. This is not the response of a responsible administration. I think that the calls that the military of Somaliland should leave Las Anod are very credible. I think that there have been delegations from Ethiopia, and I bet you the Kenya government system, even though it's small there, is also investigating what's going there. They've given reports. And at the end of the day, Debal, I feel that it is the leadership of Las Anod through the late Ali Khalif Galaid went around to Somaliland asking the communities of Somaliland and the administration that the issue of Las Anod be dealt with, and that there should be inclusion of that community in the system in Somaliland, while the Somali issue was waiting for some kind of dispensation. It was ignored by the current leader there. Yesterday he said that it was terrorism, that the government of Somaliland was fighting terrorism in Las Anod. You know, I think that its bogey of terrorism is very convenient now for systems around Africa and around the world. Anything happens and the administration doesn't like it. The TPLF was called a terrorist movement. Everybody knew it was not a terrorist movement, that it was a civil strife inside, a political battle for power inside Ethiopia. Last show, I remembered Matt saying that there was one person who was clearly identified as a person who was belonging to Al-Shabaab. I forget his name. But I think that this time I'm going to call Musa on this. He's the guy who's dropped the ball on this, and the international community has called it as so. And I think it's about time that he does not use force as a method and tries to find a way to use consent as the way forward on the issue of Las Anod.
All right, briefly, Matt or Irungu Houghton, I think is Irungu.
Okay. So I think we have to remind ourselves that you know, the DRC has, you know, one of the largest displaced populations on this continent. I mean, 5.6 million people, the equivalent of Nairobi. I mean, just imagine Nairobians just leaving in flight and fear. It also has over 100 armed insurgents, and it's very easy for the conflict in the eastern part of the country to just unravel the country, particularly in an election year. Of course, DRC is going to elections this year. I think we have to bring a spotlight to the Kenyan mediation and just begin to ask the question of whether it is unraveling. I mean, I think the President Kenyatta was quoted last week as saying that there are a number of parallel processes that have been introduced which are not helping the situation. And secondly, also, if we can just add that the current tensions between the President of the Republic and the former President have not helped. So I think the focus really needs to be on getting people back to the table and de-escalating some of these operations.
Matt.
Oh, thanks, Debarl. Coming back to the issue of Somaliland, I think I agree. The core of the issue here is not about a border dispute. It's about whether Somalia is going to be one state or two. And that comes down to one single principle, and that's self-determination. Now, in Las Anod, I would not characterize the situation the same way today as it was maybe a week ago. The Somaliland military, as far as I know, has withdrawn from the town, although it's still within artillery distance. And there is a lot of propaganda on both sides about what is actually happening, whether the city's being shelled, whether it's not being shelled, who is actually firing projectiles into the city or not. This, basically the city is now under control nominally of a council of elders from a clan that lives there, and they are declaring the right to self-determination. And they are saying, we are not part of Somaliland, we are not part of the neighboring state of Puntland, we want to be governed under the transitional or the provisional constitution of Somalia from Mogadishu. That is our exercise of the right to self-determination. The irony here is that the same group has denied the state of Somaliland the exercise of the right of self-determination for the last 30 years. So I think what we come down to is, what is the principle of self-determination? Who has the right to exercise it? When? Under what circumstances? And through what processes? And so Somaliland is saying that we are a state. We've been self-governing for 30 years. We want to be given the opportunity for an internationally supervised exercise to reclaim the statehood that we had in 1960. We have a clan in a town with no functional administration or borders saying we want self-determination under the provisional constitution of Somalia. And I think this is where we really need third-party intervention to say, look, we have two different orders of problem here. One is we need a ceasefire. We need a disengagement of forces. We need humanitarian assistance because 80,000 people are now displaced. And there's a need for the hostilities to stop. But then what? If we don't come back to this core issue of Somali unity and where the boundary between Somaliland and Somalia lies, the status of Somaliland vis-a-vis Somalia. Will Somaliland self-determine to be independent? Will it self-determine to be part of Somalia? There has to be some kind of process to do that. And within Somaliland, if the people of Las Anod want self-determination, what rights and privileges do they deserve, do they merit under the law, and under which law? Since Somaliland are essentially still in political and legal flux, we really need the international community to step up and start to provide the role of facilitation, of mediation, and to try to bring a 30-year dispute to an end.
Right. Professor Kagwanja.
Well, I don't know what exactly we are debating, whether we are debating Eastern Congo.
We started there.
Maybe
you can close on both.
No, I just want to look at the context of these of all these problems in terms of the conceptualization and the way we are doing it well or badly, depending on how we're looking at it. Now, if you recall, two scholars, Astrid Surke and Aristide Zolbach, were looking at Eastern Congo, somewhere at the height of the Rwandese massacre. And they wrote their book called Escape from Violence. They were talking about the same things we are talking about today. Refugee influxes. And the concept they brought into a play to enable us understand the complexity of the matter in Eastern Congo was what they called the refugee warrior. And the concept of refugee warrior said that the line between what is purely humanitarian intervention and a political military intervention here is blurred. And therefore, we need to look at it from that perspective. Therefore, M23 and all other these forces have two components to them. They have fighters who are working very closely with refugees. Inside Rwanda, we have forces that are working very closely with the military, and they have humanitarian needs. And that itself brings a complexity to the second force that I want to talk to, which is what Matt is referring to, that you need an arbiter, you need a third, a neutral force to this. And the neutral force in Eastern Congo, and more increasingly even in Somalia and elsewhere, is beginning to be the power, regional powers, that seems to have overcome what we are calling hegemonic instability. That is, you are a power that has capacity to project capacity beyond your borders. And Kenya seems to be that kind of a power in this region. But it looked like it was an ideal situation when President Ruto appointed former President Uhuru Kenyatta as mediator, because Kenyatta had gravitas. He's respected in Ethiopia, he was respected in Congo, he has friends in Uganda and all that. And backed by the president, it looked like this was really a working, it was an ideal situation. And if you recall the meeting in Safari Park, Uhuru was enjoying the whole power as not only as former president, but as the power at that particular sitting. It had weight. But now we are having a problem of peace abroad and discord at home, and that's what is worrying me as a person. That we are projecting our power abroad through Kenyatta, and at home Kenyatta and Ruto are in discord. Different pages. Not only in different pages, but the war has now ceased being a conflict between Raila Odinga as the leader of opposition and William Ruto as the head of government, now into a proxy war. In fact, what people are talking about, Project Odinga, is now beginning to come alive, because even when you're reading the lines here about and why Jubilee is now the battlefront, is because Ruto has seen ODM is not necessarily the new threat. The new threat is Jubilee. I think what one is saying is that President Kenyatta need to accept the reality that he has retired. The constitutional provisions that require him to retire, and the capacity and the work he can do post-retirement is very well defined by our constitution. It's all about respecting our constitution. Full stop. You respect the constitution, that we have the presidency in power and we have the retired presidency as an institution that is supposed to serve our country in a certain way. And it is supposed to serve our country the way he has been doing in Congo, the way he has been doing in Ethiopia. And when you take examples from Mali and other countries, presidents of those countries have become president of the African Union. Actually, the most effective leader in the African Union was the president of Mali. Yeah. And one was envisaging that a situation where President Uhuru Kenyatta would become the president of the African Union. But you need the backing of the president in power. Right. So you cannot be fighting the president in power at home and you expect that you're going to prosper abroad. You can't.
Can I add to that? I think that Eric Fromm, a great teacher, teaches us something from his book Escape from Freedom about reciprocity. And I think that President Kenyatta and President Ruto have history, and it's a lot of reciprocity involved. I don't think it's only coming one way. I think President Kenyatta feels threatened by the new president because there's such a word as a comprehensive word as comeuppance. And I think that this is part of this African traditions, African political culture that is really terrible. And I think the same is writ large in the DRC. The M23 is saying that President Kenyatta is biased. And I think that every group in the DRC will say any mediator who comes to the DRC is biased. Because it's just good politics. Because that person will feel like whenever he has to criticize that group or that group, he will not go all the length, but he'll try and keep it within a certain district. Duale, I think that the DRC is the great moral crisis of the 21st century, not only in Africa, but in the world. Duale, 10 million people lost their lives to slavery and oppression under the King of Belgium, DRC. There's a huge impact on what's happening now. Duale, you know that Belgium brought back the trophy they took of Patrice Lumumba, the tooth. They have not apologized for what has happened. Afro-pessimism tells us that we should dwell on the colonial past. Afro-optimism tells us that political leadership has failed. That President Kagame and the President of DRC have failed in trying to reconcile the issues of Congo and Rwanda. Duale, it looks like Rwanda wants to annex Eastern Congo, put it into Rwanda. It should be a union between Rwanda and the Great Lakes republics. That's the way forward my learned friend talks about, and I talk about regional citizenship. It's going to solve our problems. It's going to solve our problems in Somalia, regional citizenship. It's going to solve our problems in Kenya, regional citizenship. We have to understand that the platform, that the ideological and the vocabulary of the 19th century and the 20th century is not going to work in the 21st century. The models of the 20th century are not going to work in the 21st century. Right. The lexicon of that time is not going to help us. We need a political leadership that reconciles the issues of the state and the market in post-colonial Africa, of ethnicity, of citizenship, and of belonging. And Mahmoud Mamdani, probably one of the most brilliant scholars writing today about those issues, points us to what should be happening in the DRC. So public policy and international policy and regional policy has to focus on these issues.
All right, thank you. Due for another station break, we want to wrap up on that issue of DRC and Somaliland as well. When we circle back, it will be a big day on Saturday for Nigeria. And we want just to also read our tea leaves and look out at our crystal balls to see who will actually garner that particular seat, going by the political events that have been happening in Nigeria right now. Gabon politics as well. We have the president who wants to scale down the term limit for the president from 7 years to 5 years. And also, the president of Cameroon was celebrating his 90th birthday. They're saying he's clinging on to power, even if he's hanging by the fingernails for the last so many years. So we want to just look at that as well when we circle back. Don't go away, you're watching Global Today here on Morning Prime.